I started chopping samples on the computer when I was 15 years old on Sony Acid, and I didn't start my taking freelance clients and mixing until I was 25. So it took me about 10 years from the point where I started producing music to where I could actually, charge people to mix. And it didn't have to take that long. So I'm going to go over quickly today the things I wish I knew when I was 15 and 20 and 25, and hopefully save you a little bit of time and help you mix better, faster, and start having fun with this again, because it doesn't have to be a chore. Okay, let's get right into it. So, how to get better. There are, I think, 3 principles that I want to talk about, and these are the things that I wish I was aware of, because when I started, I did not understand the technical fundamentals. Now, mixing it's a very creative discipline, and that's ultimately what makes it fun. And what makes it not fun is the technical side. But you do have to understand the bare minimum technical things in organizing a mix. And I'm going to get into what those things are later in this video. But right now, we're just going to talk about these 3 principles. So understanding the technical fundamentals is the first thing. Fixing my monitoring. Now, oh my God, when I first started mixing, I remember recording my homie in our closet on the jankiest setup you could possibly imagine when I was like 19, 20 years old. And I remember putting the headphones on and walking to class at the time and listening to it and thinking, oh my God, this sounds so terrible. How do I make it sound better? And I was mixing this on a pair of Altec Lansing speakers, computer speakers that I had bought at Goodwill. It's like trying to paint a colorful picture, but wearing like colored sunglasses while you do it. You're just not going to be able to get a good result. And it's the same with the monitoring. The monitoring is coloring your sound. And if you do not fix it, you're in for a world of hurt. Now I'm going to talk about what you actually need to do to fix your monitoring later in the video, but we got one more to talk about here in terms of how to get better. And that is just knowing what you like and developing your taste. Everybody thinks they know what they like, but believe me, after a decade of mixing clients, the things that people think they like aren't sometimes actually good, or the things that people think are good are not actually what the listener is expecting. So this is a whole thing in developing your taste. Some people are just born with a really highly refined taste. The same way some graphic designers, they just have a strong intuitive aesthetic sensibility. Some people have that for sound, some people don't, but it is something that can be developed, so don't worry. And this is the hardest one, because it is a massive blind spot for so many people. Okay, let's talk about how to actually pin these things down so we can start having fun and making our music sound good. So the technical fundamentals, there's a few things regarding the technical that we have to do. Now, mixing, like I said, it's a very creative. It is, I would say, it's an emotional medium. That's what I always say. But you do have to understand a few things first. So the first thing that I want to talk about is that mixing is about balance. In a lot of the educational material that arrives in our feeds, it's really about processing an individual sound, and that sort of educational material performs really well algorithmically because it shows the story of the transformation from the raw piece of recording to a finished mix thing. But to be honest, processing a single sound isn't really mixing. Mixing is actually mixing. It's about blending all the elements. Where is this balance happening? It's happening in 3 dimensions. It's happening in the vertical dimension. That's up and down, and that's like the frequency. So, high stuff is up here and low stuff is down here. And you can imagine that vertical plane. We have to balance the elements of the song along this vertical axis. The next axis that we are balancing on is left and right. This is the panning. We're panning things left and right. The way we control that is with the pan knob. So you have the EQ and the frequency composition elements controlling the vertical axis of the balance, and then you use the panning and width to balance things left and right in the stereo field. So now we have this 2-dimensional plane of space that we're balancing things on. We're balancing things on frequency-wise. You don't want too many things up in the high end fighting each other. And if you do have 2 things sharing the same frequency range, we can pan them to spread them out to give them their own space. We have this whole plane here where we're balancing elements. Now the 3rd dimension, and this is why it's a spatial medium, is the depth, how far something is away. So we control this with just the fader. When something is louder, it's going to be closer to you. And when it's quieter, it's going to be further away from you. And so we have these 3 dimensions to balance things on. And that is the fundamental kind of material. It's the fundamental just structure, the scaffolding of what mixing is all about. Now, do we need a perfect balance? No. The imbalances are actually what make it interesting, but just understanding that concept, I wish I had known that way sooner, because it would have really opened up and quickened a lot of the decisions that I got stuck in the early days of learning how to mix. Now, the other thing that I wish I understood when I was much younger is gain staging. Now, gain staging is just an often really misunderstood concept. It's not that complicated, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it here, but basically, gain staging, it is a process, it is a verb, it is just the management of the level of your signal at every point in the chain. So what you don't want is you don't want a signal going into one plugin quiet and coming out super hot on the other end. And the reason for this is, if you can imagine that you had a compressor on your voice and a distortion maybe right before the compressor, and you're mixing and you've dialed your compression in just right, and now you decide, oh, I want my vocal to sound a little more distorted. So you crank the distortion on the vocal and it sounds more distorted, but what you don't realize is now the compressor is working way harder, because the distortion not only adds the color, but it adds gain too. So as you increase the distortion, it's effectively lowering the threshold in terms of how it sounds on the compressor downstream. So you want to make sure you trim down the distortion after. And that's what gain staging is, managing the level of the signal. And if you don't do this, you're going to get into these situations where things start getting really wonky, and it's going to be very frustrating. And this is not just out of plugins. This is out of any channel, out of any group. You want to just keep an eye making sure that things coming out are about the same as the things going in. And it doesn't have to be an exact match. You can get a little gain coming out of plugins, but just keep it in mind and manage it. That's what the gain staging is. And if you can do that, it's going to make your life so much easier, and the mixes are going to come up together so much faster. Okay, what is our third technical fundamental? It's the routing. Now, this is one, I know we're getting slightly more esoteric with each bullet point here, but the routing within your DAW, this is something also that I've seen people that are generally been doing it for quite a long time, but don't understand the basic routing within the DAW. And I'm not going to get into the weeds on what this actually means right here, but you could imagine that you need to know, if you have a channel of audio and you're sending that channel to a return or an aux, what exactly is going on there, and how that's routed. Like, I just had the example the other day. I was working with a client doing some kind of consulting on a mix they had, and they had to make headroom for the master. They had grouped their entire instrumental group basically in a bus, and then turned that bus down. Now, they had returns coming out of every channel in that bus, and those returns, basically the levels of those are parallel outside of the instrumental bus. So when you turn down the main bus, all the returns stay the same level. So when you trim that down thinking you're getting headroom, you're actually relatively increasing the send level of all your effects. And if that didn't make sense, well, we'll get into that in another video maybe. But basically, you have to understand just the basic routing of how the audio works in your DAW. And if you can understand that, if you can understand basic gain staging, and you can understand just the fundamental idea that mixing is about balancing these elements in 3D space, that's the depth of the technical stuff that is going to set you up for success, for then just being able to freely mix creatively. So now let's talk about fixing the monitoring. Like I said, I've always been a headphone junkie. I love listening in headphones, so I've always been hyper aware of, I guess, just like the different equalization curves and how the monitors affect our perception of sound. And you've probably noticed this too when you play a mix back in the car. It sounds different than on the AirPods, sounds different than on the studio monitors, etc. Now, the biggest thing to know is that when you're mixing, if you're mixing not in headphones in a small room, that the room is really affecting the way the speakers sound. If the sound is coming out of the speakers omnidirectionally, and it's reflecting off all the walls, and it's reflecting on every single surface and bouncing back at the speed of sound into your ears, and it's the sum of both the direct path from the speaker to the ear, it's the sum of that plus all the reflections in the room at different times hitting your ear. And as those reflections, some of them hit a little bit later, a little bit sooner, they add and they subtract with each other to color the sound that you're hearing out of your speakers. So the space is going to drastically affect what you're hearing. And just to get ahead of that, you kind of want to set your speakers up in a certain way, because you're going to want them to be an equilateral triangle. If my head is right here, you want your speakers, your monitors, to be basically forming a perfect triangle with your ears. You want them pointed slightly inwards towards your ears also, and you want them, this is almost the most important thing now, you want them to be at ear level. So you want a perfect horizontal plane that makes a equilateral triangle between the two speakers and your ears, your head. It should be a triangle like that. Don't put your vertical monitors sideways. I know it sounds nice and funky when you do that. It sounds three-dimensional. That's not what you want, though. I did it for a long time because I thought I liked the way it sounded, but it smears the image, and that nobody's listening to their speakers sideways like that. It looks way cool. It looks cool. It looks so cool. I've been so tempted to turn these speakers sideways just purely for aesthetic purposes, but don't do that. Keep your monitors vertical. Keep them at ear level. Keep them in an equilateral triangle with your head. And then if you are in a small room, you're going to want to back those up as close to the wall as possible. And if you can, put some sort of treatment behind them, some sort of padding or something behind the wall. But if you're in a small room, you're going to want to get them, right up on that wall to kind of minimize the interference of the reflection that comes off that back wall. And finally, on the monitoring side of things, it is worth investing in some metering plugins so that you can see both loudness, you can see root mean squared loudness, I guess, if you want. I was not trying to get too into the too technical stuff, but the other one that I really like is the isotope tonal balance. These kind of a multi-band sort of metering tool, or not multi-band, but just it shows you metering across the frequency spectrum, which I really like because, again, in the small room, it's really tough to pin down the low end. And so those sub-frequencies, we can't often hear them on our small speakers. So it's nice to have some way of monitoring the low frequencies. And, I'll eventually get into actually how to do all that. But for now, it's just like, it's nice to have a LUFS meter. I like the Brainworks BX meter for just like a quick check on RMS. Okay, so let's talk about developing your taste. Now, this is the other thing where I just, when I was in my early 20s mixing, I knew what I liked in terms of sound, but I'll also can be the first to admit that what I liked wasn't necessarily good. And I've developed a sensibility around sound, but I did not do it alone. What really accelerated my mixing progress, and this is the biggest thing, and I probably should have put this first in the video, but if you want to get better at mixing faster, you have to mix for other people. You have to mix other material. Because imagine if you're trying to cut hair and you're just cutting, but you're only cutting your own head, how long would it take if you get one haircut a month? You cut your own hair once a month, and it's the same head every time. It might take you years to get a decent haircut. What if you cut a friend every single day? How fast you would get at mixing, or at cutting hair. And it's the same thing with mixing. If you mix other people and they're giving you feedback, you're going to be able to learn so much faster than if you're just mixing your own material, trying to solve the same problems over and over and over and over again. And the benefit of mixing other people is that you get exposed to blind spots in your own personal taste, because everybody has such a different taste that you're most certainly going to learn a thing or two. You don't have to agree with their taste, but just being exposed to it is going to help develop your aesthetic sensibilities sonically. Now, the other thing that really accelerated my just understanding of how to mix is observing other professionals learn how to mix. Now, when I was, early 20s and I was producing my buddy Sendai Era, and we would go up to another studio. We went to a few studios and had another engineer, but this was before I was like mixing professionally. And I just sat on the couch and watched these guys work. And it wasn't even like watching which plugins they were using or their workflow, but just seeing how they ran the sessions and how they made choices and how they listened. that was the big thing for me is just observing and seeing how other people interact with the decision making around sound. That was just so invaluable for me. Also collaborating on production with other artists. You know, you just learn so much in collaboration and by observing other people who are at a higher level than you. It's absolutely invaluable to do if you're trying to learn faster. Now, the final thing that I want to say here is that you have to build your trust in your intuition around how something feels, and this can be really difficult because there's kind of people go one way or the other. They're either almost too satisfied too soon and too they haven't developed. If you haven't developed the sense of taste, but as soon as you start to develop it, it starts to become very easy to double guess yourself all the time. And I see it all the time where people are so, and I used to be like this, just like anguishing over what sounded right or what sounded good or what felt good. And it's something that you need to just build the muscle for, so that, because a lot of the frustrating part of mixing is just like fighting with stuff that doesn't really need to be fought. And it is as much about aligning your chakras and making sure all your inner sort of insecurities around sound and how things feel, especially when you're mixing your own stuff. It's the damnedest thing. So you have to just build your own trust with yourself, that you know what you like as you develop your taste, so that you can move forward confidently. And if you need second ears to do that, then go for it. The only thing holding you back from being satisfied with your own sound a lot of times is just your lack of confidence in your own sound, and it's very psychological, and it's hard to wrap your head around, but it's something to be aware of. So yeah, I hope this video helped. I mean, it was kind of random, kind of all over the place. I am trying to develop a course right now that's going to teach this kind of stuff in depth, and we're going to go from these kind of bigger, broader, big picture stuff on how to accelerate your learning down to the nitty-gritty technical. But while I'm putting it together, I'm just like writing down all the ideas I'm having, putting them into an email newsletter. If you want to sign up for that, just hit the link in the description, and I'll catch you next time. Hopefully make more videos soon. Peace.